Hey Harmony 9 students, today's video is all about the chorale. This question is usually worth about 30% of your overall grade and involves almost all of the skills you've learned in your Celebrate Theory Harmony 9 books. In this video, I'm going to walk through how to complete the question, why I choose certain chords, how to determine if a piece modulates, how to identify if notes are non-chord tones, and how to manage your time. Here's an exam question example. You'll be given approximately 4 short phrases to complete. They'll be marked with fermatas. Some will have a bass line and a melody line, some will have a bass line or a melody line, and you're required to add any missing voices to create a 4-voice texture. Let's start by identifying our key signature, and then I like to write out the scales so that I can see all the notes I'm working with, be extra aware of when a note doesn't belong, and be able to easily see what chords are possible. What I'm going to do is take this one phrase at a time. I always start first at the cadence so that I can identify the key that I'm cadencing in. This is going to help me make better chord choices and help me identify if I need to have a pivot chord. The final chord of the cadence is almost always going to be the tonic or dominant. Exceptions include the tonic substitute if we have a deceptive cadence. So with my first phrase, I can see that it's an authentic cadence in the home key. Anytime you have a repeated dominant note at the cadence, I always check for the cadential 6/4 option. Now I'll go back to the beginning and plan out a potential chord progression before filling in my inner voices. I'm looking for chords that fit into a tonal hierarchy phrase model. Your tonal hierarchy is essentially the structure of your phrase. We have 2 basic ones to choose from: tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic, or tonic, predominant, dominant. This one is going to follow tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. The goal here is to take out the randomness when we're choosing chords, so we're going to pick chords that are appropriate for that section of the phrase. Finally, I'll head back and add in all my inner voices. I want to ensure that there are no parallel fifths and octaves, that my voices don't overlap or cross, that each voice stays within its recommended range, and that my voices are within an octave of each other, though the bass and the tenor can be further if needed. So here you see me alter my progression and switch the subdominant chord for a submedian chord. I did this because the 6th chord kept my voices as common tones. If I had stuck with the 4 chord, it would have resulted in a large leap in the tenor or alto voice, and it would have also resulted in parallel fifths between the alto soprano or the tenor soprano. Moving on to phrase 2, let's jump ahead to the cadence again. Here I see an accidental signaling to me that something is happening. Remembering that we're in a major key and an altered 6th or 7th isn't applicable, there are really only 3 reasons an accidental would appear. First, it's a non-chord tone. 2, it's an applied dominant. Or 3, I've modulated. There are 2 main reasons this accidental tells me it's a modulation. There are multiple G sharps, and there's a perfect fifth in the bass at the cadence, along with the accidental telling me this is probably an authentic cadence in A major. Remember that the biggest difference between an applied dominant and a modulation is that modulation's cadence in the new key. So how did I know it was A major? The dominant key is one of the most common keys to modulate to. I also know that I already have 2 sharps in my key signature, and when I add a G sharp to that, I'm left with a key signature of either A major or F sharp minor. Now that I know I need to modulate, I have to find a pivot chord that belongs in both keys, and it should happen right before that first accidental. I chose the chord of A major in first inversion since it functions as the tonic in our new key, and is really the only chord you know at this level that belongs in both D and A major that has a C sharp and an E. Okay, let's quickly talk about second inversion triads. These should be used very carefully. There are 4 main times to use a second inversion triad: a neighbour 6/4, a passing 6/4, an arpeggiating 6/4, or a cadential 6/4. The neighbour and passing typically occur between 2 statements of the same chord. These are not chords that function independently, but as a means to get smoothly from one place to the next, or create a little interest between repeated chords or inversion changes of the same chord. Once I have a potential progression worked out, I head back and fill in my inner voices just like I did with the first phrase. As we go, keep an eye out for any voice leading errors and adjust your chords as needed. Be sure to also label any non-chord tones and be aware of any potential accidentals needed during the modulated section. With phrase 3, there's no bass line, so there's going to be more variation with answers because of this. A different answer is not necessarily a wrong answer. So I'm going to head over to my cadence once again to figure out, am I still in A major or have I returned to D? I don't see any G's in my melody line, so I'm not sure whether or not these are still sharp or not, so a cadence in A major would be possible, but I'm going to plan a half cadence in the original key. You could choose 4/5, 6/5, or a 1/5 half cadence. Remember, you can always change your chords if the ones you chose aren't flowing well or are creating voice leading errors. As I choose chords this time, I'm also going to add my bass line in as I go, because it's a lot easier to look for parallel octaves and fifths when you're only working with two voices. It's also going to allow me to look for a smooth and interesting bass line, and that it's not staying stagnant or creating awkward leaps. In this phrase, I start in A major, so I'm choosing chords that emphasize that key at the start. I've already planned that my cadence is going to be in D, so where to pivot? Find melody notes that will allow for a chord with a G. Choose one of these and know that it will be the chord that you are now in D major, since G is the distinction between the two keys. The chord right before that is going to be your pivot chord. I also try to identify opportunities to use specific chord progressions that we learned about in the Harmony 9 book. These repeated E's I see here in the soprano, that's the perfect opportunity to use the neighbour 6/4 progression. This is going to expand your tonic, and since we're still in the tonic section of our tonal hierarchy phrase model, it works very well. Finish filling in your inner voices, following proper voice leading, and move on to phrase 4. By now we're pros at this, so head on over to that cadence and aim for an authentic cadence in the home key. Since we have our outer voices, this phrase is going to be a bit easier. I'm once again going to look at the tonal hierarchy, choosing appropriate chords, and I'm going to label my non-chord tones and fill in my inner voices. At the cadence, you're going to see me choose to add a 7th to the dominant chord. I want to end with a complete tonic chord for a really final full sound, and adding the 7th to the dominant eliminated the leap of the 3rd in the tenor voice. A couple of things to remember. It's okay to go 4/2, but not 2/4. Both are great predominant chord options, but 2 propels us towards the dominant due to the relationship of fifths. If you put a 4 chord in the middle of that, it's going to stop that forward motion in its tracks. Second, always resolve your 7ths. A 7th of the chord should fall by step unless you're doing rising resolution, and a leading tone should rise to the tonic unless it's in an inner voice and drops a 3rd to the dominant note. 3. Modulation is very common. One of your phrases will most likely modulate, so look out for that. 4. Always double check your work. I usually recommend doing this question either first or last. If you do it first, you get it done so your mind is fresh and you aren't stressed about it. It also gives you the chance to come back to it later with fresh eyes and look for any voice leading errors that could have been missed. Or, if you finish the rest of your exam first and save this for last, you can spend all of that extra time on it without worrying about not finishing your complete exam. Try both during your practice tests and see what one works best for you.